Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Jessica Luciere. It's
Luciere.
Luciere. I checked with Jessica before, and I was pronounced it Luciere, and now she's corrected me. I still can't get my head quite around it. It's an Italian name, but Jessica. More importantly, Jessica is an adoptee, and she also works at Spence-Chapin, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for coming on the show, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So mentoring, that's one of the key roles that you fulfill at Spence-Chapin. So we're going to explore mentoring as a way of helping adoptees heal and thrive. So big question for you.
Yes.
And then we'll dive into it. How does mentoring help us adoptees thrive? How would you see that?
In my experience, I think mentoring is a great way for people to see themselves reflected back, and for so many of us, our experiences seem so much of our own. And, we tend to ask a lot of questions to ourselves and kind of keep our stories and our experiences contained. So what mentoring does is it gives you the opportunity to hear from other people who share this very deeply common bond. And, in a very, I hate to use the word normal, but in a normalized way where you start to realize that, being an adoptee is one element of who you are. And there's so many things that make us us. So to have different representations of adoptees and adoptees' experiences kind of, just available to you in a mentoring setting, it really gives you a sense of belonging and a sense of, having a shared experience with a lot of people.
Yeah. There's so much there, and the first thing pops into my head is that conversation I had last week. I was talking about meeting. I think the first conversation that I had with another adoptee who wasn't my sister was when I was like 18, and there was that bond, an instant bond, and the bond creates some kind of the bond normalization and stuff creates some kind of safe zone. There's like it's like an instant connector.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the great thing about talking to other adoptees, whether you're in a mentoring setting or not. It's you just get that sense of you meet somebody, you have that shared experience. There's so much that you don't have to say because you both just get it.
Yeah. So I guess the difference between my chat at a party, like 30 odd years ago, and like an acquaintance rather than a mentor, there's a lot here about the mentors who are maybe ahead of us on the journey, so they can what's the word? They can share the wisdom that they've learned on that bit of the journey that they are ahead of. They've done more, learned more, and they can kind of pass that back.
That's the assumed kind of outlook on what mentoring in my experience in this particular program has been. But for any of the mentors who have been mentoring for a long time, where we have longer life, we've had longer lives than the kids that we mentor. There's a lot of times that we're in those spaces and those kids are the ones that are kind of sharing their own lived experiences with us and mentoring us in ways, because although they may be younger, the conversation of adoption and the experience of having it be more of a public conversation than it ever was for my generation gives them some more very real experiences with kind of being a person who's living out loud as an adoptee, whether they've chosen to or not. So the mentoring happens really kind of all around,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah, it's wonderful.
Interesting. Something flashed into my head. It's nothing to do with the adoption, but all to do with the wisdom of a younger person. So
Sure.
they tend to have less on their minds. Right?
Seemingly, for some, you know, we as adults, we have our own, you know, like, you know, adulthood is what it is, and there's just a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressure. But these kids live in a world now where, you know, with all of this connectivity and all of these social pressures and external pressures that we may not have had at their age, you know, I can't say it's necessarily comparable. It's just different. You know, there's, yeah.
Yeah. The particular, as I asked that question, before I asked you a question, two examples came to my mind. The second one was kids get over stuff faster. So I remember being on holiday, and our friends had left their dog in a kennel while they're on holiday, and the dog unfortunately died. And
Oh
the parents, everybody's distraught about it, right? We knew the dog, we were upset as well. And but the following morning, their like 3-year-old daughter had got over it quicker, and
wow.
I think I often talk about this on the podcast, is that fragility is learned. I mean, people talk about resilience being learned, but I don't. I think we're kind of like, we're born resilient. We the older we get, the more fragile or the slower. It's often we bounce back slower as we get older, and I guess that bounce back is also part of the wisdom. You know, the wisdom drives the bounce back. And
yes.
That may be. Have you ever seen that resilience or wisdom coming through from a younger, perhaps the kid that thinks that they're the mentee, and then they step into a role when then they become they become a mentor, or they just have a wiser take on stuff, and that's when the traditional kind of older and wiser idea gets flipped on its head.
Absolutely. I mean, there's elements, of course, that, you know, having a longer experience, just being older, can trickle down into, you know, how our kids kind of move through their lives, because they have these examples, they have these people that they trust, and they, you know, grow to know. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, within our program, you know, we create a lot of space for fun. We create a lot of space for open conversations and talking about the things that kind of matter the most to adoptees. And sometimes, you know, that can talk about, you know, we talk about, you know, talking about difficult topics, or how we share our stories, or what happens when our narrative is taken away from us and is shared with people that we, you know, may not have necessarily shared our story with. And it's in those moments when our mentors, who've been through similar experiences, from, you know, for the most part, have had their story told for them by other people, you know, they have learned how to work through that, and how to take ownership back of their stories. And when we talk about these things, we talk about owning your narrative, and, you know, you being in charge of what information is shared about your story. You know, I think from the adoptee lens, it's so important to talk in those terms, because for a lot of us, you know, the story is kind of shared as, you know, a family story, or in preparation for us as younger people to go into new spaces, our parents may have to give a little bit of a background. So when we talk about ownership to these teenagers of your own narrative, it empowers them to feel like, you know, maybe I know how to approach bullies differently. Maybe I know how to approach new settings differently. And so in that, it's taking the experience, the lived experience of the mentors, of how they have had to go through those spaces themselves, that helps these kids incorporate that into their own lives, and therefore, giving them that resilience to live in spaces, to exist in spaces, and know that, it may be a new place, it may be new people that they're sharing space with, and they can own their stories. They can be in charge of, how their information is shared with other people if they choose to share it. That's one example of resilience. But absolutely, in those ways, we're able to give back to these kids in ways that we never had anyone there to help us through some of these things that we probably never even knew that we could have an older example of, an experience that we share to kind of help guide us through some of these trickier or, more complicated places in life.
Yeah. Because I see a lot of, I see a lot of people very upset by having their narrative taken off them. See a lot of adults very cheesed off about it, and then they get cheesed off about it even more when somebody calls them an angry adoptee.
Sure. Of course.
So how does mentoring help avoid that?
I think mentoring and creating these safe spaces and these, very dynamic spaces for adoptees at a young age, I think that it gives adoptees the power to write the narrative. So much of the experience is other people telling us how we should exist, right? We should be grateful, we should be thankful, we should be happy that we are where we are. And, those elements of telling somebody how to live kind of starts to influence them, as they grow into an independent person. And if they start having questions about that, or if they start kind of wondering where is my voice in all of that, and they don't have a place to ask those questions, or they don't have a place to share those experiences with others who get it, they can start internalizing it. And that can lead to, them not kind of taking ownership of their own story and their narrative, and feeling like they are a product of other people's decisions. Yeah. And so I think mentoring gives a place to talk about these things and put it out on the table and hear from other people who may share some of the, these deep thoughts that you may have inside of yourself, and talk about it openly, and therefore, quote unquote, again, not wanting to use the word normal, but normalize it.
Yeah. No one's ever told me I should be grateful. So I like it, but generally speaking, I'm not very happy about anybody telling me anything that I should do, right?
Right.
And I think that's a human thing rather than an adoption thing. I'm sure some shrink would be able to point that back and try to make that, but I've seen it too. I've seen it too often in two of the people. Everybody wants to have an opinion, and everyone's got one, but just I heard something on this a while ago, and it's something like other people's opinions of us is none of our business, something like that.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's also something to a certain degree what we talk about in mentorship. We talk about, there's a lot of the kids that are in our program who are transracial adoptees, myself included. So I was born in Colombia. I was raised in New York by Italian American parents. And, there's a lot of that, when we're out in public, a lot of that looking. I have brown skin. I have very curly hair. My parents and I did not look alike. They had lighter skin. They had lighter hair. So we were a family that one could look at and say, I wonder what's going on there. And people would do that, but they would say it. They would say, and I remember them saying very silly things to me. You know, they would say it was always, the approach was always very strange to me. People would start asking like, oh, you look so much like your mom. My mom was very fair skinned, had red hair and freckles, could not look more different than me at any point in my life. And, you know, what we talk about in mentorship is, you know, we're observing our parents in those moments when they are the voice of, you know, the rebuttal, or they're the answer to those absurd questions. And we're watching how they interact, how they answer, and how they kind of, you know, move through those conversations. And what we ultimately talk about in mentorship is, you know, not everyone who has a question deserves an answer. There are people who are going to ask you questions about who you are and why you're in the space that you're in, or why you're walking with the people that you're walking with, or why your mom looks the way your mom looks if you don't look like them. And again, kind of going back to taking back your own narrative is finding comfort in saying that you don't have to answer everyone who has a question. You don't always have to walk around this world being an adoption advocate. You can be yourself and not have to explain your family to a lot of people. And so I think it's especially for families that may tend not to look alike that we hear a lot of that narrative of, oh, you should be grateful, because there's an identifiable difference in your family, and people feel more that could be the first thing that they start with. Oh, you must be so grateful to have such a great family. You should be grateful, you know? So, you know, all of that kind of comes back to, again, one's narrative and learning how to differentiate between who is inquisitive for, you know, the right reasons, and really interested in those who just want to answer their own questions that they have swirling around in their head that really it doesn't matter to them. It's none of their business.
Yeah. Some things just clicked between an American culture thing and a Brit culture thing. We're less gushing. You know what? Like gushing. Like,
no.
Well, gushing is, oh, you should be so grateful. Oh, how fantastic. You know, we're a little bit more, right. You know, like we're generally speaking a little less positive. Do you know what I mean? So this is why it doesn't, like, you know, we see this grateful thing. I think, man, I've never heard that. No, is that because I've never heard it, or because, you know?
But I think it also comes back to what you and I talked about the other day, which is that, you know, international adoption is not necessarily, it's not, you know, as prevalent in the UK as it is here. So when they see these things, when they see these differences in your family, and they can notice obvious cultural differences, they automatically are going to go to the negative and say, oh, you know, I was born in Colombia. Oh, you were born in Colombia. Oh, you should be so grateful that you're here. Yeah. I mean, my goodness, you know, because people want to romanticize what they consider to be not as good as, you know, where you are now. So that's an element of it also.
Yeah.
It's
that we're better in the developed world, or you know, we're richer, and therefore we're better.
Right.
Put it really succinctly. That's just that just stinks.
Complicated.
That just stinks. I was going to go down there. I was going to share something that I learned about that. I've started, so I'll finish now. But so 20 years ago, this is just an aside, ladies and gentlemen. Please bear with me. 20 years ago, my best friend died, and we were on holiday, and I was really upset. You know, unsurprisingly, and the waiter, a local waiter, we were in the Gambia, Western Africa, and the waiter said, "What's wrong?" And I told him that my best friend had died, and he said, "Oh, may his soul rest in peace." And I was touched by his comment. He felt me, you know, and then in the morning I told the rep, you know, the travel person, you know, visiting our hotel, who was British, and I told her, and her first words were, "You'll have to pay to change your flight to go back home for the funeral." And this was a real epiphany moment for me when, I hadn't gone through life thinking that I was some kind of fascist, do you know what I mean? Or believer that the Western world and the developed world was better than I did, so what do they call it? Maybe I had an unconscious bias. I think that might be a kind of like a PC way of describing it. But what happened is, I saw in stark contrast the difference between a Western take and a European take, shall I say, and an African take. And it was a real wow moment for me when I thought, how much other stuff I've got in my head that I'm not aware of, and I'm judging, unconsciously judging us to be better than them. Weird one. Anyway, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that was a bit of an aside, but this is the stuff, when we uncover, I'm apologizing for it twice, but until we make what somebody said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. Something like this whole conversation is about bringing beliefs about who we are and our place in the world into the light and having a good look in them. And you talked earlier on about questions, mentoring being an arena for us to ask questions raise questions with other adoptees. What's the value of that for you?
Can you ask me that again?
What's the value of raising questions that we may have kept to ourselves with other adoptees?
I mean, I think at the core of it all, it's really, it all comes down to healing. When we see younger adoptees as older adoptees, and when I say older adoptees, I mean, adoptees who are over 21, there's a reflection there that, we can be looking at any child or any teenager from any part of the world or any part of, the US, and we see ourselves. And, I think at the core of what we're doing is we're giving them a space to ask the questions, to feel comfortable in spaces where we may have never found ourselves, or we had never even thought we could be comfortable in kind of becoming who we are in those most important formative years, the tween and the teenage years, to be amongst others who have similar life experiences, and who can feel comfortable in their skin, who don't feel judged, who feel like their voice matters, their story matters, their experience matters, and it adds to this collective feeling of belonging. Yeah.
You said, I scribbled it down, something about we didn't think we could be comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, as an adoptee who has thought about my identity along the way, as a teenager, as a young adult, as an adult, and occasionally as a child, something that I very much so believe is, our parents are our first line of defense, right? When we're little, they're the ones that kind of make sure that we're okay. They check the road to make sure there's no holes that we can step in or rocks that will fall over, and as we get a little bit older as adoptees, we kind of become their first line of defense, meaning, we may shy away from, sharing with them some of these deep questions that we may start having, whether it be, for a lot of us, I wonder who I look like. That can be a question that might be difficult for us to kind of conceptualize as a question that we would share with our parents, because it separates us. It separates us from them, and we start to understand this separation in our experiences, although we are a family together. And as we're growing through these things and we're starting to think about our independent identities away from our families, because the world, as we grow, starts to look at us and say, you know, oh, you are a person of color, and you probably, you know, in my sake, you probably speak Spanish, and you probably have family from a different country. When we start kind of having to understand that we have experiences of our own that we can't share with our parents, sometimes it can be a little difficult to talk about that. Therefore, we internalize these things. And for those adoptees who are lucky enough to have a community of adoptees where you can grow together and have these conversations in real time, you're in that experience, you're creating your own little safe space. But for so many of us, and especially for those of us who are mentoring and who may not have had these experiences of other people around us, I think mentorship creates a space where we let those questions out. We let those internal feelings come out, be a little bit more normalized, and shared with other people. And by sharing and talking about it, you know how it feels to get something off your chest or talk something out with somebody who's, you know, who's really there listening to you and giving you that space. That's what mentorship does. Again, kind of going back to that element of healing, we're healing our younger selves by being able to have some of these conversations. We're also learning so much from these kids who are in those moments right now. And we see ourselves reflected back in them, but we're there ultimately for them, to listen to them, to give them that space.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So just before you said that, we had no one's rung me all day, but you know, the phone rang, and I'm caught up in the practicalities of switching the phone off, shoving the phone into the next room so if it rings again. And in amongst all that logistical rubbish, you drop a truth bomb like that. That feeling that you said that word, you said two words. You said it separates us.
Yeah.
The questions separate us. And as you said that, I went all tingly. I thought she's just she's put the finger on the button there. Yeah. I
mean, that's, you know, that's the value of community. I think, you know, when we really start to, you know, community is used in so many different ways. I have been lucky enough to be a part of communities, this one being the longest, you know, the longest amount of time that I have been a part of the adoptee community, meaning as an adoptee who has sought out other adoptees and who has been lucky enough to be in spaces where more spaces are created for adoptees by adoptees. There's so much power, and there's so much of that feeling of, you know, of just, I mean, I keep using the word belonging, but that's really what it is. And in community, when you're amongst people who you can share things with, there's healing. There's, you know, there's so much positive things that come out of that. And I find myself to be very lucky, you know, to be able to share my time with other adoptees, to share spaces, to create spaces, because we all need that healing, all of us. We all need those spaces to be very real and talk about the things that make us us, and to feel valued and appreciated. And what better arena to find myself in than to be able to work with young adoptees, you know, for all these years.
So how has it helped you? How's it healed you? How's it shaped you?
I mean, I don't even know if I can find the words, but I will say what I say every single year that we start a new mentorship year. We're starting one in September soon. You know, these mentees that we have, my fellow mentors, everyone's stories start to impact my own story. Every time I talk to a new adoptee, talking to you the other day, talking to you today, you know, your stories, your experiences, the things that you share with me change my narrative, because now I know more about the adoptee experience because I've spoken with you, because I know that you are a person who's existing in the world with a story. And I'm lucky enough to have been there to witness it. And for me, being a part of this program, seeing how much it has benefited families, see how the relationships have formed, these lifelong bonds that people have created with one another, you know, with our mentors who have been with us for years, with mentors who join us for the first time, you know, 1 year and stay with us for all these years, for the kids who come back to the program, who were mentees in the program, who come back to be mentors. There's this sense of importance and understanding that, you know, you're not alone in your own story, and your story has a lot of power and value that it can add to others, and being open and sharing and being willing to help other adoptees understand that their stories really do matter and they can make a difference. That is what mentorship has done for me. It's given me a family I never knew I could have. Mentorship and being connected with other adoptees has seen me through the most difficult and life-changing moments of my life, and I could not have done it without the support of my friends and you know, those that I know because of this program. They've seen me through losing my adoptive parents. They've seen me through reuniting with my birth mother, traveling down to Colombia, navigating, you know, language barriers, cultural barriers, getting married, having kids. It's been my touchstone. Yeah.
Is there a particular, so it's hard to put the enormity of this stuff into words. Yeah. So, I mean, and it's very hard to put love into words. We see, you know, I was talking about this to my coach a couple of weeks ago. You know, I've been with Lynn since 1993, and I remember a couple of years after I got together with her, I remember this idea popped into my head: why do I love her? And it's just like, you're in the wrong filing cabinet, right?
Yeah.
The why do I love her? It is in the head. And the feeling of love is in the heart. So you look and completely looking in the wrong place, right? Which is why words can't express, you know, words can't express. And at the same time, it's all we've got. So is there a particular moment that comes, or moments that come to mind, that kind of rocked your world, changed your world for the better during the time you've been involved in this mentorship space?
Absolutely. You know, I think back to the times where we've had kids who have joined the program, and, you know, any kid who joins the program generally comes in with a certain, you know, healthy dose of hesitancy, you know, to join and to share. I can remember one young man who was very quiet and found his way to kind of isolate a little bit during our events. And I should say that our mentorship program is a group mentoring program, so there's no one-to-one mentoring. So that means that everyone has seemingly access to everybody at all these events. And he would kind of sit a little bit to the side and focus on the things that he wanted to focus on. And it was really before social media. It was a long time ago. But he always kind of brought something to keep him busy. And it was usually something creative. And I remember realizing that I was going to have to find a way to connect with him. And I had to find a way to engage him because I knew that he wanted it. I knew that he wanted to be participatory, but I knew that he just was kind of interacting in his own way. And so it took a moment of me, looking over at him and, noticing what he's doing and acknowledging it a little bit and starting to realize he was more creatively minded. And I'm a photographer, and so I'm a creatively minded person. So I said, okay, so the next event I brought in my camera and I would sit with him and I would be like, oh, could you hold my lens for a second? Could you hold the camera body for a second? And, then we would start talking about the camera, and it piqued his interest. And so where we might be having a day where we're doing actual activities and we're talking about a specific topic, we found a way to connect through that. And as that continued, that was my in. And we bonded over art. We bonded over photography. And I saw him inching himself a little bit closer back to the group because he knew he had an ally there. He knew he had somebody who got him. And in the moments that he needed to kind of talk to him, talk on his own or do his own thing, there was somebody who was going to be acknowledging of that and also give him his space. And I watched this young man blossom into somebody who was hesitant to participate in the activities, not really share too much, to coming in and feeling 100% comfortable in this space and relying not on me in an outward way. There was no like, oh, hey, thanks for making it comfortable for me, but just in that sense of feeling ushered in and accepted by somebody. And for him to have he's now in his 20s and he's an incredible photographer who's traveled the world and who has better photos than me, and and has just become this independent person with a creative mind of his own. And I know the value of what those early years meant to him. And those were my early years of being a mentor and being a young person myself. And that is the impact that I immediately knew. We all need somebody to see something in us without us having to tell them about it, so that we feel like we're being seen. We feel like we're making that connection. And when it doesn't have to be this whole production and somebody just takes the time to sit with you, it makes all the difference. It gives you that sense of belonging, and it gives you that empowerment to then be a resilient person who owns the things about them that makes them them.
Yeah.
That's one of the many stories that I could tell you, but
Yeah.
That's one that always stays with me. And I think I actually told that story maybe yesterday. It
Cool.
still stays with me after all these years.
So when we talked last week about this, I was very taken with the idea of group mentoring. I'd not heard about it in the adoption space.
Yeah.
And yet the reason that it really appealed to me, and I would encourage you, listener, if you're looking at this, and we're going to get into some more practicalities in a minute, but one, I've done a lot of work with kids, and in a group, tough stuff is a lot easier in a group setting, because the kids who are a little bit more backward at coming forward, like perhaps this young man who discovered his love of photography thanks to you, they can take a back seat, and that, whereas one-to-one stuff, it's like, yeah, the other person feels like they're under a spotlight. You hear about this not in mentoring, but in I've heard this from therapists, for the first, you talked about caution and natural caution, and we'll have that to a lesser or greater extent. So the in a one-to-one situation, the other person has got to is under a lot of pressure to create
Yes.
that rapport and,
Yes.
and take forward, and the other person can often back away,
Right.
back away, and the place things goes nowhere. Where in a group environment, people can engage at their own pace,
Right.
and not leave the space because they feel uncomfortable.
Right. I mean, I think group mentoring allows for people to make very organic and unique and occasionally, conscious connections with people. Because our program gives kids spaces to talk, but we also have a lot of fun. We do a lot of fun activities throughout New York City. You may gravitate towards somebody differently in a conversational space, and then somebody else when we're out, rock climbing, or when we're out going through Central Park Zoo. And that availability of, connecting with other people based on the setting, but then ultimately, you also have that deep connection of being an adoptee. It bonds you on different levels. And what we've definitely experienced is that our kids make connections with us, whether we know it or not. They make those kind of, unconscious, I should say subconscious, connections with us in different spaces, which makes our programming even more important, because, something that we ask of our mentors is that they're fully committed to the full year, so that they have an opportunity to get to know these kids in a lot of different settings. It takes the pressure off of looking at somebody and saying, okay, so tell me what's up with you today. What do we want to do today? They have people to choose from. They have their peers to choose from, who they want to hang out with, or who they want to talk to, or, how we break our groups up, depending on the activities. And I think because of that, it's grown a lot of really wonderful connections. And people have a chance to get to know one another in each event in a different way.
Yeah. So imagine for, the listeners are still listening with whatever 35, 40 minutes in, right? And the adopted parents thinking, I think this is for me, but how am I going to engage my kid, my teen in this process? Because I think it's a good thing, but I definitely don't want to. I don't want to put any pressure on my child to explore this further, my teen to explore this further. How do you help parents in? What could you say to parents to overcome that hurdle?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first, for adoptive parents who find programming like this, or who hear this and are intrigued, there's an element of this where, the parents know that this is going to be a special space for their kids that they cannot really participate in. Of course, there's other spaces for the parents to participate in their own spaces. But, I acknowledge that even kind of, for parents to be able to acknowledge that this could be something that's really beneficial to their kids is a really great first step. And again, like I said before, every kid who kind of comes into this program, there's a healthy dose of hesitancy, but the teenager has to want to be a part of this program. So the way that we enroll our families is so that the kids get an opportunity to get to know our mentors a little bit. There's information on our website that gives kids an opportunity to learn and to see our mentors through pictures and bios, and, having a conversation with myself, having a conversation with some of the other mentors in the program, hearing testimonials from other families, other kids who've participated, the mentors who've participated. We want to make sure that it's engaging to the kids also, that it's interesting, that they hear things in the activities that we have planned that pique their interest. This is not just a conversational based mentorship program. Like I said, the way that our calendar runs is really, through September through June, we may have some days that are in the calendar where we talk about the, experiences of adoptees in a very fun and activity-based way. And then other days we're out in Manhattan doing all sorts of fun things. So we always make sure to listen to what our kids tell us and what they want to do in, the new year, or how they think we could better run an activity. It's made for them. So I think, connecting with me, connecting with our website, having that be the first place where you kind of, as a family, have a conversation about the program and talk about it in a way that makes it sound like fun. And the way that I like to think about it is, for me as a mentor for all these years, it was always kind of like I was re-enrolling in camp in September. When you're coming out of camp in the summertime, joining mentorship for me was kind of like that experience of being in camp and doing something. You have a different social circle than your friends at school. You get to be somebody else somewhere else and have a lot of fun, but also, feel like you're in a place where people get you, and you don't have to talk about it all the time, but the space to talk about it is always there. So I think, always talking about it as a family, and asking questions, and looking on our website and kind of familiarizing yourself with the people that we have enrolled in the program as the support, as the mentors. That could be a really great place. That is a really great place to start.
Yeah. So a lot of people talk about, healing in community, healing in relationships, healing in connections, in connection. And that seems to be what this is all about. And it's the antidote to that feeling of separation.
It is. And I'll also say that, truthfully, kids who come into our program aren't necessarily, or families are not looking to necessarily heal things. They're looking for a place of community, but I think community does that by default. Whether or not we know that we are dealing with things that need to be healed, or pieces of our stories that we need some sense of, not closure, but just shared experience on. I think it's a byproduct of being in a space where you have a common shared experience, whatever it may be. But yeah, it's a place to belong, and it's a place to be yourself, and just enjoy others who are in the same boat as you in a lot of ways.
So what's the question that I've not asked?
What's the question that you have not asked?
Or what we'd like to share that I've not given you opportunity to share?
I think we've done a good job of of talking about, all of the benefits of the program. But I will say that for kids, they're just trying to, be themselves and grow up and not always stand out. This is not a group that makes you stand out. It's not a group that makes you different. I can't imagine the benefits of having a community like this when I was a younger person would have made, the difference that it would have made on my life. But I get to see the experiences now from the kids who join us. I get to see the families who stay lifelong friends, who put their kids through college together, who travel together, who after almost 20 years of this program being this program, have still remained close and still can find the value in having this first experience of having their kids be in a program like this. There's so many benefits of adoptees coming together, adoptive families finding their own communities, parents finding community in one another. And it creates a really wonderful place where from very early age, there's an understanding that the child and the parent may have, that as they grow, they will have different experiences, and it doesn't have to be this this separation that continues through life. It can be something that bonds them together because of these first experiences in mentorship, and in programs and in spaces where they get to be with other adoptees. We learn how to incorporate our families into this. We learn how to talk about these things so that, you know, for me personally, when I was about to reunite with my birth family, I knew how to have these conversations with my parents and make sure that they understood that it didn't mean I loved them any less, or it didn't mean that I was running off to find a new family and that I was never going to come back. You know, adoption is a piece of our lives that is a shared experience as much as it's our own personal experiences. And we want to keep the people that we love closest to us. And having these conversations at a younger age, I think, helps better put our kids in a position to know how to navigate relationships with their families as they grow, as they change as individuals, with friends, in other relationships in other spaces. So, you know, I think the benefit of being able to share this with others has lifelong benefits that we've been able to see, thankfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, we've been focusing on the in-person mentoring groups, but for kids, but there are other opportunities available through Spence-Chapin, right? So there's some parenting online groups, if I remember rightly.
Right. So for the parents who are enrolled in some of our community programming beyond mentorship, meaning for kids who are a little bit younger or even kids who are a little bit older than our mentorship program enrolls for, there are online parent groups where we talk about topics that are important to adoptive parents, but that also somewhat fall in line with some of the topics that we talk about in mentorship. Because, you know, like I had shared with you the other day, and I just kind of touched on just now, being able to start these conversations in mentorship and in some of these other community engagement spaces that we have for kids, we want to give parents the tools to continue those conversations at home in a way that suits their family. So we talk about a lot of different topics. We talk about advocating for your child. We talk about gender. We talk about race. We talk about how to share, you know, how to help your child, you know, develop their own narrative around their story, who you share their story with. We talk about a lot of different things, and we give parents, it's not necessarily like a webinar, it's more of an open discussion. We want to hear from everybody. Everyone has their own experiences with these different topics, and everyone's story helps to better inform each other about how to navigate through these spaces. And having adoptees on the call helps to give some perspective from the adoptee experience for those of us who are a little bit older than their kids. So,
okay. So as always, listeners, the links that you need are in the show notes, and you can find out more about Spence-Chapin, the programs. You can get in touch with Jessica, and there's a contact email contact box on there, on the page that's in the show notes. So thank you very much for sharing all you've shared. Any last things that you'd like to share, or any questions you'd like to ask me, or anything else before we close up?
I just want to say thank you to you, Simon, for giving us a space to share about our programming. I'm happy to connect with adoptees all around the world and their families to help them find support if they're not in the continental US. But it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. And I look forward to many more years of connecting with adoptees and hearing more stories.
Yeah. And just one thing that's popped back into my head, a lot of, you mentioned last time that I haven't brought up, that a lot of the people that joined you as mentees are now mentors, right? So
absolutely,
this what hasn't, I mean, we touched on it briefly. This is kind of a it's not just a community for the length of the programs.
Totally.
It's a community that's built up over years, where people keep on sharing and coming back to it, and as they grow, they share stuff, which I'm getting slightly tingly feeling on my arm, in terms of whatever you're doing. And there is I mentioned the word magic, right? And words can't say, but that's all we've got. But when you shared to me about how this just rolls, and how people stay involved, and how their roles within the mentoring stuff really made me realize that you must be onto a good thing here. And I haven't really talked about this, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of this around, like therapy is talked about as a route far more than mentoring, which is why I was delighted to be able to bring this up into the light, and hopefully make a few more people aware of it, so that they know that they can explore this as a route.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, actually, because, importantly to note is that this is not a clinical space. And having it not be a clinical support group allows for it to be a community-based group, which, has clinical elements to it, of course, because we're talking about, deep things. But at the core of it, it's an element of fun, and our kids return to us every year. And for those of us that we're lucky enough to have come back as mentors, it just continues to show you how wonderful and impactful the program is, because they get this opportunity to be mentored, and it inspires them to want to be mentors. And, there's an element of kind of empowerment and leadership in what we do with our kids, that helps better prepare them for the next step in their life, which is for many college, or, moving into the professional world. I think that there's no better experience as a person in your formative years than to have a mentor, or to have mentors in this case. Because if we do our job well, we create new mentors, and that is absolutely invaluable and priceless. And that's the reward, to be able to see these kids come back and now continue to make a difference in even more lives.
Brilliant. Fantastic point to wrap on.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Jessica. And
Thank
you, listeners. We will speak to you again very soon. Thanks.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.